Alright, let's practice some sentences. I'm going to prompt you with 5 English sentences based on the grammar from Unit 1, Lesson 14, and it's going to be your job to try to translate those sentences to Korean. The first 3 sentences I want you to try are all very similar, so I'm going to show you all 3 at the same time. They are: I turned the light off, the light is turned off, and the light turned off. Obviously, you're going to need more than 10 seconds to translate these 3 sentences, so I'll give you 10 seconds, and if you need more time, which you obviously will, just pause the video and you can continue whenever you're ready. Okay, before we even start, you can see these 3 sentences are all very similar, and I purposely use these 3 sentences so we can sort of talk about the grammar that's introduced in Unit 1, Lesson 14. Before I get into translating these sentences, if you look at them, there's really only 2 or 3 words that actually pop up in all of these sentences. And why don't we just talk about those 3 words off the bat, and we can sort of focus on the grammar when we get into the sentences. One word that you see in all these sentences is light. And what I'm referring to is the light is sort of like a light bulb that you would have in your house or in somebody's house. It actually could refer to fire, and the word for that in Korean is 불. 불. So that word is going to appear in all of the sentences. Another thing that you see in all the sentences is either the active form of turning off, or in other words, to turn off. And the word for that in Korean is 끄다. 끄다. And there's also to be turned off. And that's sort of the passive form of to turn off, or in other words, somebody actively turning something off. And that word, which is very similar to 끄다, is 꺼지다. 꺼지다. So we're going to either see, well, we're always going to see 불, and we're going to see one of these 2 in all the other sentences. And really that's it in terms of vocabulary. What we need to look at is the grammar that we learned in Lesson 14 and how can apply these words in order to make these sentences. Now, in this first sentence here, this is an active sentence because I, the subject, did something to an object. Now, let's start writing that by putting just I, the 저는. Now, as I said, this is an active sentence, so I know that I'm going to be using this because I did this, or in other words, I turned off the light. And in this case, the light, which would be the object of the sentence, is 불, which we saw before. As I mentioned, that's the thing that the verb acted on. That's the thing that I turned off. Therefore, that's the object of the sentence. So I'm going to put the object particle onto it there. Now I need to use 끄다 in order to indicate that I turned off this object. And I need to do that into the past tense because I turned it off. I'm not turning it off, or I'm not going to turn it off in the future. So in order to put this into the past tense, you need to use your irregular information or your irregular knowledge that you learned from lesson 7. It's not going to be 끄다, it's going to be 껐어요. And this is conjugated in the informal high respect form, which is what I usually use in my videos, but you could use another honorific here if you wanted to. This sentence would read, 저는 불을 껐어요. Now in this sentence, as I mentioned, this is an active sentence where I have a subject acting on an object. In this sentence down here, the second one, and actually the third one as well, there is no person or there is nobody doing a verb onto an object. Instead, what I have is the object, and the object, in both cases, the same object, the light, is doing something. And it's not some person or not some thing that has free will that's actively doing something to this light bulb. Instead, the light bulb is doing something sort of on its own, and that's what we see more down here. But in this case, I want to explain what is being meant in this situation. In this situation, you walk into a room and the light is already off. I don't know how it was turned off. I don't know when it was turned off, but I walk into the room and it's off. If I want to do that, okay, well, in this case, the subject of the sentence in this case is the light. I am not in this sentence. It's just the light, and I'm indicating that the light is turned off. So in this case, I'll start the sentence by using the light at the beginning. I'll put that there. And now if I ever want to indicate that something is turned off or something is turned on or something is open or something is closed, in the state of that, where it's not something closing or opening or turning off or turning on, if I just want to indicate that it's in that state, what I want to do, as you learned in lesson 14, is I want to add this to the passive verb. Now, in this case, this is the passive verb here. So I'm going to add this to 거지다. And what I'm going to get out of that is now, a couple of things that I want to point out here. This is 있다, which is this 있다 here, but this is just, I am using the informal high respect honorific again, so it says 있어요. Now, this sentence would read, 불이 꺼져 있어요. The next sentence, what we see here, the light turned off, this is, you're in the room already, you're standing in the room, and all of a sudden, for some reason, you don't know why, and you don't know how, but the light just automatically turned off. How did it turn off? Well, I don't know. Maybe is it a sensor? Maybe is it a timer? I have no idea. I'm just specifically indicating that light turned off. I did not turn that light off. If I turn that light off, I would want to use this sentence up here. But in this case, this light, without its own free will, somehow turned off. And that's actually what this verb is actually used for in this case. If I want to do this, the subject of the sentence is actually 불, so I'm going to start that again here. So 불. Now, what did the 불, or what did the light do? Well, it turned off. And again, I don't know how this happened, but if I want to indicate that, I want to use this verb. So I simply use 꺼지다 here. But it happened in the past tense. It turned off. So I'm going to add the past tense conjugation to 꺼지다, and it's going to look like 꺼졌어요. Now, this sentence would read, 불이 꺼졌어요. Now, if you look at these three sentences, and especially in the first one, as you may or may not know, and I do mention this a few times in my lessons up to lesson 14, if you're ever using an active sentence like this, you don't really need to use the subject, especially if the subject can be assumed. You could just walk into a room and say, 불을 껐어요. And it would be assumed that you turned off the light, or it would be assumed that somebody, whoever you might be referring to in a previous sentence, turned off the light. You don't necessarily need this subject here, because in Korean, not just the subject, but in Korean, whatever can be assumed in a sentence usually is assumed in a sentence, and it's usually sort of eliminated from a sentence. So you don't necessarily need this, but it's not right or wrong if you include it or not. So if you look at all three of these, number 1, 2, and 3, they actually look very, very similar, but it's very important that you understand sort of how to create these different meanings of something being in the state of, on or off, or open or closed, or whatever different situations you may have, or an active sentence where somebody is doing something to an object, or a passive sentence like this where you just have some inanimate object that's automatically sort of turning on or off, or opening or closing. Now, the next two sentences I want you to try, okay, we're getting away from this confusing stuff here. Let's go to two new sentences that'll sort of be different from each other. The next sentence I want you to try is, our love started at that time. I'll give you 10 seconds, and you can start now. Okay, the subject of the sentence in this case is going to be our love. So if I want to write down our love, I have to use the word for we, which is 우리. And I have to use 우리 onto that to indicate that it's not we love, but it's our love specifically, just like I turns into my, and love in Korean translates to 사랑, or to love turns into 사랑하다, but the noun form of love is just 사랑. And you don't actually need this 우리. This is something you don't necessarily need, and I might even take it out. It's sort of one of these things, again, that you can usually assume. If you just say 우리의 사랑 or 우리 사랑, that's the subject of the sentence, so I'm going to put this here. Now, what I have so far is, okay, I have our love, and this is going to be the verb at the end of the sentence. This here is the time that our love started. Well, at that time in Korean is really just one word, and the word is 그때. Now, what I have so far is I have all this and I have all this. Now I just need to indicate that our love at that time, I need to indicate that it started. I want to pose you two different verbs that you could use here. You could use 시작하다, or you could use 시작되다. Now, one of these is an active sentence, and this one here is the active one, or sorry, an active verb, and this one here is the passive one. Now, in this case, did some person actively start some sort of thing. So for example, did I start my homework, or did I start, some sort of job, or did I start something that could be an object? Well, no, I didn't. And that's, if I wanted to use 시작하다, that's what I would use it for. But that's not what happened. Instead, some sort of inanimate thing, and that's my love. I guess you could say my love is animate, but I don't want to get too much into my love life here. But some sort of inanimate thing, some sort of idea started. And in that case, you want to use this passive form of the verb, this 되다 form of the verb. Again, if you have a 하다 form of a verb, usually those 하다 form, the passive equivalent of those is just the same thing, but instead of putting 하다, you change it into 되다. So in this sentence, you don't want to use 시작하다. Instead, you want to use 시작되다. So if I know that already, all I need to do now is, well, it started. So I'm going to have to put 시작되다 into the past tense. And do that here. 시작. There's actually two ways you can do this. You could go 되었어요. Or another way that you could do it is that ot could actually merge directly to te, and it could look like this. They both are perfectly acceptable, and one's just sort of, more of a contraction of the other. But they both could be okay. Now this sentence would read, 우리 사랑은 그때 시작됐어요. The next sentence I would like you to try is, a sound came from the computer. I'll give you 10 seconds, and you can start now. All right. Now, if I want to start this sentence, well, what's doing the actual coming out? If I'm talking about the verb here is coming out of something. Well, what's doing that? Well, it's actually a sound. So the subject of the sentence is going to be a sound. So I'm going to put 소리, which translates to sound here. Now, I'm going to have to indicate that it came out of or came from the computer. In a previous lesson, you learned how you can talk about something if it comes from a particular place. And you can do that by putting eso onto the place or the thing that's coming out of. Well, where did it come out of? Well, it came from the computer. So you're going to put computer, you're going to attach computer to eso, and it's going to look like this. Computer. Now, this is sort of the beauty of Korean, and one of the hard things about Korean, and I guess probably the hard thing about learning any language. Sometimes there's verbs that could translate into many, many different things, and sometimes the direct translation doesn't always work. If you look at this, you say, okay, well, I have the sound, and I have from the computer. All I need to do is talk about the word came. Well, I know that the verb to come is 오다. That's really about sort of like a human coming from a place, or some sort of thing that can walk or run coming from a particular location. Sound doesn't really do that. And actually, if you ever talk about a sound, and I talk about this in lesson 14, if you ever talk about a sound, just a sound being made, usually what you do is you put 소리, 나다. And nada is one of these verbs that there's no perfect translation for it, because it could translate to 100 different things depending on whatever the noun it's used with is. So, for example, you also learn that in lesson 14 that you could put the word 사고 here, 사고, 가, 나다. And these aren't conjugated yet, but I'm just using it to refer to the many different translations that nada can have. Well, this is an accident. And you wouldn't say an accident came, and you wouldn't say an accident was made. You might say, oh, an accident happened, or something like that. So nada, if it's talking about a sound, maybe you could say, a sound was made, or a sound came out, or something like that. But if you're talking about, depending on what noun goes here, this nada could have many, many different translations. So in this particular case, if you ever want to talk about a sound being made, you'd want to use nada. So I'm going to put nada here, but specifically I got to do it in the past tense. So it's going to be 났어요. And again, this is the informal high respect honorific. So anyways, that's just a little quick talk about nada. And really the thought that I want you to take from this, and especially just from this sentence, there's really two things. One, if you ever want to talk about a sound, being made or something like that, you could always just use, 소리가 나다. And number two is I want you to realize that nada could be translated to many, many different things depending on the noun that it's particularly working with in this particular case. This sentence would read, 소리가 컴퓨터에서 났어요. Well, that was fun. I hope you learned a lot.